Fellas, if you're watching this video, there's a high chance that you know the name Conor McGregor, and it's no, it's no lie that he's gone on a bit of a downfall recently. So today we're going to be talking about the tragic downfall of one of the biggest stars in the UFC, which is Conor McGregor. We're also going to be talking about his rise, how he became popular. We're going to be talking about his prime, and we're also going to be saying where it all went wrong in his career. So yeah, please let me know if you agree with this, but we're going to go straight in there with his career rise. Now, Conor McGregor, he won 5 out of his first 6 fights by first or second round knockout. So coming into the UFC, he was already a massive prospect. It was no lie that Conor McGregor was one of the biggest prospects entering the UFC. 5 out of his first 6 by knockout. And ironically, the only person he didn't actually get to knock out was Max Holloway himself. But yeah, finished most of his opponents. He was already a big star coming into the UFC, like I said, because double champion Cage Warriors I think he won his first 12 by knockout, or he won 12 out of his first 13 by knockout. But yeah, he already had so much hype behind him, and he was the biggest prospect in the UFC. I mean, in his third fight, he was fighting in Ireland. I believe it was his third fight, the one after Holloway against Brandao. It was in Ireland, and it was already a huge prospect in the UFC at this point. One of the biggest. He was charismatic as well. He could speak on the mic and he could fight, and he was such an entertaining fighter, not because he just finished people really quickly, but also just the way he fought. He was such an elusive kickboxer. He was never in a boring fight. And before long, he actually got into a fight with Chad Mendes and won the interim belt. So you got to give it to McGregor, man. He had a great start in his career. He had everything going for him. And I like to call this motivated McGregor. This was when McGregor really wanted to win. This was when McGregor was at the kind of the rise of his career, when he was actually making progress in his MMA career. And obviously, we don't really see that McGregor anymore, but that's the rise of McGregor. Champion potential as well. It wasn't like he was just someone like Paddy Pimblett who, could speak well on the mic but couldn't fight. He had champion material and everyone knew it as well. So that's the rise of his career, and it's not, I think it's safe to say that he had a pretty decent rise in his career. But then we go on to his prime. Now for me, Conor McGregor's prime was definitely 2015. He had a 13-second knockout over Jose Aldo to become the featherweight champion of the world, which, I mean that's impressive in itself. To knock out Jose Aldo, who was one of the best in the sport at the time, still to this day top 2 featherweights of all time, and to go in there and sleep him in 13 seconds, I believe that was the fight that really made Conor McGregor the star he is today. I think that's really the fight that made McGregor a star. And even the Diaz fights, he had 2 massive fights with Diaz, and he did lose one of them. And I know it's kind of hard to say it's his prime when he lost one of them, but he did lose one of the Diaz fights, but they had one of the biggest rematches in UFC history against Nate Diaz, where he was managed to win, and it was such a fun fight as well. So this was the prime of McGregor, in my opinion. It was just really entertaining. And then obviously he knocked out Eddie Alvarez to become the lightweight champion, the first ever double champ in UFC history. That fight with Eddie Alvarez was so clean, man. Eddie Alvarez couldn't touch him. McGregor was just battering him. There was nothing Eddie Alvarez could do. And Eddie Alvarez isn't necessarily a bad lightweight by any. Like, a lot of people think Eddie Alvarez is a poor opponent. He's not. Eddie Alvarez is still a solid lightweight. And that's the McGregor prime for me. When he was starching everyone, when he was at the top of his career, double champ, and already by this point, I believe he was the biggest star in the UFC history. Already, by the time he'd beaten Eddie Alvarez, arguably by the time he beat Jose Aldo, I think he was the biggest star in the UFC. This was the peak of the UFC, in my opinion. 2016, when McGregor was double champ, had 2 massive fights with Diaz. He did suffer his first loss, but he got a massive win against Diaz in the second fight. McGregor was just on top of the world at this point, man. No one was taking it away from him. He could outspeak everyone. His trash talk was in S tier. His fight entertainment was in S tier. His skills were in S tier. Like I said, first ever double champ in UFC history. I really want to see how this McGregor would do against somebody like Alexander Volkanovski nowadays. And I know this was the lightweight McGregor, but imagine 2014, 2015 featherweight McGregor against featherweight Volkanovski. I think that's a really interesting fight. But then we go on to the beginning of the end. Now this is where McGregor's career he started to take a turn for the worse. He got mauled by Khabib after a 2-year layoff. He took 2 years off the sport after 2016, didn't fight in 2017, and came back late 2018, and he fought Khabib, and it was a pretty terrible decision, to be honest with you. He got absolutely mauled, and this is the biggest fight in UFC history. Everybody was watching. Everybody that liked McGregor was watching this fight. Everyone that knew McGregor was watching this fight. Every MMA fan was watching this fight. It was the peak fight in the UFC. I don't think there's ever going to be a fight that tops this in the UFC. Biggest pay-per-view sales in UFC. It was massive. And he got mauled. He got mauled. All that trash talk that he had with Khabib, and he got mauled for it. He got absolutely mauled. And that was kind of the first fight. Like, he'd lost before in the UFC. Obviously, he lost to Diaz. But this was the first fight where it wasn't just a loss. It felt like Khabib was taking his soul. And then he takes another 2 years off the sport. Comes back, I think it was January 2020, to fight Donald Cerrone. And I mean, it was impressive. He came back and beat Cerrone in 1 round. But look at Cerrone. Ever since this fight, he hasn't won in a while. He still to this day hasn't won. And I know he's retired now. I'm not going to, disrespect Cerrone or anything, but he wasn't the most impressive win, and still to this day, it's McGregor's most recent win. And then he fights again in 2021 against Dustin Poirier, a guy who he's already knocked out in his early career, and he gets slept. For the first time in his career, he's been outstruck and slept. In the UFC, he's been submitted twice. This was his first, well, he didn't get slept, but he got TKO'd pretty badly. But yeah, this was the first time McGregor actually lost on the feet, and a lot of people didn't expect this because he was coming off a win over Floyd, well, not a win over Floyd Mayweather, but he was coming off a fight over Floyd Mayweather. He had a completely new boxing stance and it just didn't work. He got outboxed by Poirier and then eventually got finished, and this was again the beginning of the end for McGregor. It didn't get better from here because then he ended up rematching. It was a trilogy with Poirier, and he was getting dominated in that fight anyway. The trash talk came back, and his trash talk in the trilogy with Poirier, it was really poor. His trash talk had gone down a level. It felt so forced, didn't feel natural anymore. Not much people really liked McGregor anymore, and he ended up pretty much getting beaten up by Poirier until he got his leg broke, and since then still hasn't got a fight. And now we're going to talk about McGregor now. Now this is the current McGregor we've got. The drugged up and the drunk to McGregor that we all know. This is him now, and it's been a massive downfall. To go from one of the biggest stars in the UFC, I mean, he's still the biggest star in the UFC, don't get me wrong, but from the prime of his career, and now he's kind of just a guy. He's not really motivated. He's just a fat, rich middleweight who's got no motivation behind him. He doesn't even know when or who he wants to fight. He's been calling out Alexander Volkanovski. He's been calling out Sean Strickland. He's been calling out Michael Chandler. He swore to everyone that it's going to be Chandler by December, and it's not, because we've already got the fights that are booked for December and he's not on them. I don't know when he's going to come back. I don't even know if he's going to come back at this point. When he got coached with Michael Chandler in the Ultimate Fighter, I thought it was almost guaranteed that we're going to see McGregor back, but it wasn't the case. He's still not back. I don't know when he's going to come back. Like I said though, built like a middleweight. I don't know how he's going to make lightweight if he's built like a middleweight. It's pretty obvious he's juiced up. The main reason he's still not got a fight is because he's not in the USADA pool, which is quite, it's quite suspicious, because if he pissed in a cup, it would melt right through the cup. And I think, yeah, it's just over for McGregor now. I don't know what he can do in his career. I mean, maybe he can get the fight with Michael Chandler, but he's probably going to get dominated in that fight anyway. That's assuming that he makes 155 and he's actually a clean athlete. But either way, let's be honest, if McGregor's not a clean athlete, it's not like Dana White's going to stop him from fighting. There's the Diaz trilogy, but that Diaz has to come back to the UFC, and they've still got to book that fight, so I don't really see that happening. I just don't know what's going to go for McGregor now, man. I mean, he's rich, he's done his career, he's rich, he's won the belts, but now there's just not much for him to do. He's kind of just a lazy middleweight with not much to do. And like I said, we go back to when he was hungry and motivated. He could starch nearly everyone. He was starching everyone, and it kind of around the 2018 time when it all went wrong, got finished by Mayweather, got finished by Khabib. Recently, he's been finished by Poirier in both fights. One brutal injury that kept him out for about 2 years. And his last win was Donald Cerrone in early 2020, and Donald Cerrone's not won since, so in terms of mixed martial arts, his career's kind of gone on a downfall, and it's not even like he's doing anything. He's just showing up to these random events. His life kind of revolves on Twitter nowadays. So McGregor, it's a bit sad, but he has gone on a massive downfall. So please let me know what your thoughts are on McGregor, but it's a bit sad. He went from one of the biggest stars in the sport, and he still is, but it's just a bit of a tragic downfall. No longer a big star, but yeah, thank you for watching.